In Providence, Rhode Island, a black attorney was driving home from court in his BMW when he was pulled over by a rookie cop who looked at him, looked at the car, and decided something didn't add up. Even with all his documents in hand, the man was handcuffed on the street, accused of vehicle theft, and taken to the police station. But when the case landed in Judge Caprio's hands, one forgotten detail turned everything upside down. And the officer who made the arrest, he left the courtroom handcuffed, crying, learning the hardest lesson of his career. Do you think the officer deserved this lesson? Comment below. David Thompson adjusted his tie in the rearview mirror and smiled. Another victory in court. His client, a single mother fighting an unfair eviction, would keep her apartment. 12 years as a civil rights attorney had taught David that small wins mattered as much as landmark cases. He merged his black BMW onto the main road, heading toward his office in downtown Providence. The car was his reward for years of pro bono work, finally balanced with paying clients. He'd earned every penny. That's when he noticed the patrol car. It appeared 2 cars back, maintaining steady distance. David checked his speed, exactly at the limit. His registration was current, inspection sticker valid, everything legal. But he knew this feeling. He'd felt it 100 times before. The patrol car moved closer. David could see the officer now. Young, white, buzz-cut, probably fresh out of the academy. The rookie stared at David, then at the BMW, then back at David. David's stomach tightened. The lights flashed red and blue. David pulled over immediately, hands visible on the steering wheel. He took slow, deliberate breaths. Stay calm. Be polite. Survive this. The officer approached cautiously, one hand resting near his belt. David kept both hands on the wheel, fingers spread wide. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation. Good afternoon, officer. May I ask why I was stopped? License and registration, now. David spoke slowly, carefully. I'm reaching for my wallet in my jacket pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm moving my hand now. The officer watched David like he was handling explosives. David retrieved his license and registration, extending them through the window. The officer barely glanced at them. Instead, he studied David's face, then looked at the BMW's interior, the leather seats, the dashboard, the expensive sound system. This your car? Yes, sir. The registration shows, step out of the vehicle. David's heart dropped. Officer, I said step out. Hands where I can see them. May I ask what this is about? The officer's hand moved closer to his weapon. Out. Now. David opened the door slowly, hands raised, moving like he was underwater. Everything in slow motion, every gesture careful, deliberate, non-threatening. Turn around, hands on the vehicle. Officer, I'm an attorney. I just left the courthouse. My identification clearly shows. I said hands on the vehicle, David complied. His briefcase sat in the passenger seat, filled with legal documents, bar association credentials, business cards. None of it mattered. The officer patted him down roughly, then grabbed David's wrists and pulled them behind his back. The handcuffs clicked shut. You're under arrest for possession of a stolen vehicle. David's mind reeled. Stolen? Officer, this is my car. The registration has my name. The registration could be fake. This vehicle doesn't match your profile. My profile? David's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. What does that mean? Guys like you don't drive cars like this, not legitimately. There it was. The truth laid bare on a Providence street at 2 in the afternoon. A woman walking her dog stopped and stared. A teenager across the street pulled out his phone, recording. David hoped he kept recording. At the station, they processed him like a common criminal. Fingerprints, mugshot. A holding cell with concrete walls and fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. David asked repeatedly to call his law partner. They ignored him. Hours passed. Finally, a sergeant appeared, looking at David with confusion. You're David Thompson, the civil rights attorney? Yes, I've been trying to tell everyone. Why the hell is a civil rights attorney in my holding cell? The arresting officer appeared defensive. He was driving a stolen BMW, or at least I thought. You thought? The sergeant's voice hardened. Did you run the plates? Silence. Did you verify the registration? More silence. The sergeant closed his eyes. Get Judge Caprio on the phone. Now. The courtroom felt different when you sat on the wrong side. David had argued cases here dozens of times, always standing confidently at the defense table. Now he sat in the defendant's section, still wearing his suit, but feeling exposed, diminished. Judge Frank Caprio entered through his chamber's door. The bailiff called for everyone to rise. David stood, studying the man whose reputation preceded him. The judge known for compassion, for seeing people as humans first and cases second. Frank settled into his chair and surveyed the room. His eyes paused on David for a moment, and something flickered across his face. Recognition? Confusion? Then he looked at the paperwork before him. Mr. Thompson, Frank said, his voice gentle but puzzled, I've seen you in this courtroom many times, always as an attorney, never as a defendant. Yes, Your Honor. This is a mistake. Frank turned to the young officer standing rigidly at attention. Officer Bradley, you arrested Mr. Thompson for vehicle theft. Walk me through what happened. A deal. Officer Bradley straightened his shoulders. Your Honor, I observed the defendant driving a high-end vehicle through a residential area. The vehicle and the driver didn't match expected demographics for that neighborhood. Frank removed his reading glasses slowly. Expected demographics? Yes, sir. The car was a BMW 750i. Expensive. The defendant. Bradley caught himself. Mr. Thompson didn't fit the profile of someone who would own such a vehicle. The courtroom went silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Frank leaned forward. Officer Bradley, how long have you been on the force? 3 weeks, Your Honor. I graduated from the academy last month. 3 weeks. Frank set down his glasses. And in those 3 weeks, someone taught you that there's a profile for who can own nice cars? Bradley's confidence wavered. Sir, we're trained to notice inconsistencies. Inconsistencies. Frank picked up David's file. Mr. Thompson is a civil rights attorney with 12 years of experience. He owns a law firm in this city. He's argued cases in this very courtroom. And you arrested him because his car was too nice? I had reasonable suspicion, Your Honor. Based on what? Did you run the plates? Bradley hesitated. No, sir. Did you check if the vehicle was reported stolen? No, sir. Did you verify the registration Mr. Thompson provided? I believed the registration could be fraudulent. Frank's expression hardened. You believed. But you didn't check. You didn't call it in. You didn't do any actual police work. You just looked at a black man in an expensive car and decided he must be a criminal. Your Honor, I was trying to... Trying to what? Frank's voice rose for the first time. Protect the community from what? A successful attorney driving home from work. David watched the exchange, feeling something shift. This wasn't just about his case anymore. Frank was addressing something bigger. The judge turned to David. Mr. Thompson, I apologize. This should never have happened to you. Thank you, Your Honor. Frank looked back at Bradley. Officer, do you know why I became a judge? Bradley shook his head. Because I watched my father, an Italian immigrant, get stopped, questioned, and humiliated for the crime of succeeding in America. Police didn't think someone who looked like him, who spoke with an accent, could own nice things honestly. They assumed criminality, just like you did today. Bradley's face paled. My father taught me something important that day, Frank continued. He said, Francesco, never judge a man by his appearance, judge him by his character. You failed that test, Officer Bradley. The sergeant who'd called Frank stood near the back of the courtroom, arms crossed, watching his rookie officer crumble. Frank picked up another document from the file. There's something else here that troubles me deeply. Mr. Thompson, how long were you held before being allowed to contact anyone? 6 hours, Your Honor. 6 hours without counsel. 6 hours without verification. 6 hours because one officer made an assumption. Frank's jaw tightened. We're not finished here. Not by a long shot. Officer Bradley's training officer stepped forward from the back of the courtroom. Sergeant Mike Dawson, 22 years on the force, a man whose reputation for tough policing preceded him. Your Honor, if I may speak. Frank gestured for him to approach. Sergeant Dawson. Your Honor, Officer Bradley was following protocols I taught him. We instruct our rookies to trust their instincts, to notice patterns, to question situations that seem unusual. Frank's eyes narrowed. You taught him that a black man in an expensive car is unusual? I taught him to be observant, to recognize when something doesn't fit. Something doesn't fit. Frank repeated the words like they tasted bitter. Sergeant, are you saying you stand by this arrest? I'm saying my officer acted in good faith, based on his training. David felt his chest tighten. This was how it always went. The system protecting itself. Senior officers closing ranks around rookies who made mistakes that somehow always targeted the same people. Frank set down his pen with deliberate force. Sergeant Dawson, how many black professionals live in Providence? I don't have those statistics, Your Honor. Thousands. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, professors. Do you routinely pull them over to verify they legitimately own their vehicles? Dawson's jaw tightened. We patrol based on crime statistics and suspicious behavior. Mr. Thompson was driving the speed limit on a public road in broad daylight. What was suspicious? The totality of circumstances suggested a black man couldn't afford a BMW. Frank's voice cut through the courtroom. Let's stop dancing around it, Sergeant. Dawson straightened his posture, defensive now. Your Honor, with respect, you're not a police officer. You don't know what we face on the streets every day. We have to make judgment calls to keep people safe. Safe from what? From Mr. Thompson? From successful black citizens? The sergeant's face flushed. I'm saying that crime patterns in certain demographics stop. Frank held up his hand. Do not finish that sentence in my courtroom. The tension was suffocating. David watched other officers in the gallery shift uncomfortably. This was exposing something they all knew existed, but rarely discussed openly. Frank pulled another document from the file. I have Mr. Thompson's arrest record here, or rather, his complete lack of one. Not a single violation, not a parking ticket, nothing, yet Officer Bradley treated him like a dangerous criminal. Why? Bradley spoke up, his voice smaller now. Your Honor, Sergeant Dawson said we should always assume... Assume what? Frank leaned forward. What exactly did your sergeant tell you to assume about black drivers? The courtroom went deadly silent. Bradley looked at Dawson, then at Frank, trapped between loyalty to his training officer and the weight of the truth. He said expensive cars in certain hands usually mean drugs or theft. Dawson's face went white. That's exactly what you said. Bradley's voice cracked. You said trust your gut. You said if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't. You said guys from those neighborhoods don't earn that kind of money honestly. The words hung in the air like a confession. Frank stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. Sergeant Dawson, you've been training officers for how long? 15 years, Your Honor. 15 years of teaching racial profiling. 15 years of instilling bias into every rookie who comes under your supervision. How many David Thompsons have been stopped, searched, arrested because of what you taught? Dawson had no answer. Frank turned to the bailiff. I want a complete review of every arrest made by officers trained by Sergeant Dawson for the past 5 years, every traffic stop, every search. every use of force incident. The sergeant's career was imploding in real time, but Frank wasn't finished. He looked at David, then back at Bradley. "Officer Bradley, did you read Mr. Thompson his rights?" Bradley's silence answered the question. "Did you allow him to contact an attorney?" More silence. "Did you process him with his consent or by force?" Bradley's voice was barely a whisper. "By force, Your Honor." Frank picked up his gavel. "Then we have more to discuss than just a wrongful arrest." Frank stood and walked around his bench, something he rarely did. The informal gesture made everyone in the courtroom lean forward. This was personal now. Officer Bradley approached the bench. Bradley walked forward on unsteady legs. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated. Frank studied the young officer's face. "How old are you, son?" 24, Your Honor. 24. Your whole life ahead of you. Tell me, when you put on that badge, what did you think you were becoming?" Bradley's voice trembled. "A protector, sir. Someone who keeps people safe. And do you think you protected anyone today? When you handcuffed Mr. Thompson on the street? When you processed him like a criminal? When you denied him his rights for 6 hours? No, sir." Tears welled in Bradley's eyes. "I realize now I didn't." Frank turned to the bailiff. "Officer Martinez, please handcuff Officer Bradley." The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Bradley's face went white. "Your Honor." "You heard me. Hands behind your back." "Sir, I don't understand. Do you remember how it felt to put handcuffs on Mr. Thompson? The power you felt, the certainty that you were doing the right thing?" The bailiff approached with handcuffs. Bradley looked desperately at Sergeant Dawson, but the sergeant could only watch helplessly. The metal clicked shut around Bradley's wrists. "How do you feel right now?" Frank asked quietly. Bradley's voice cracked. "Humiliated, Your Honor. Scared. Powerless." "Good." Frank's voice was firm but not cruel, because that's exactly how Mr. Thompson felt. A successful attorney driving home from work, suddenly treated like a criminal because you decided his success didn't match your expectations. Tears rolled down Bradley's face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Frank turned to David. "Mr. Thompson, this young man violated your civil rights. He falsely imprisoned you. He subjected you to public humiliation. You have every right to press charges. What would you like to do?" David stood slowly. He looked at Bradley, young, crying, handcuffed, and saw not a monster but a kid who'd been taught wrong. "Your Honor, I want justice, but I don't want revenge." David's voice carried across the silent courtroom. "I want him to understand, to really understand what he did, and to never do it again." Frank nodded with deep respect. "Officer Bradley, Mr. Thompson is showing you more mercy than you showed him. I suggest you remember this moment for the rest of your career." He gestured to the bailiff, who removed the handcuffs. Bradley collapsed into a nearby chair, sobbing. Frank turned his attention to Sergeant Dawson. "Sergeant, you're suspended immediately pending a full investigation. Your training methods will be reviewed by an independent panel, and I'm recommending you be removed from any training capacity permanently." Dawson's face hardened. "Your Honor, you can't." "I can, and I am. You've been poisoning young officers with bias for 15 years. That ends today." Frank picked up his gavel, but didn't strike it yet. "This case reveals something rotten in how we train our police. Officer Bradley didn't wake up racist. He was taught to see certain people as suspicious, taught to trust stereotypes over facts, taught to enforce laws differently based on skin color. He looked at everyone in the courtroom, officers, clerks, observers, reporters who'd arrived when word spread. "Mr. Thompson's arrest is dismissed. All records will be expunged. The city will issue a formal apology and compensation for his false imprisonment." Frank's voice rose with conviction. "But more than that, this department will implement mandatory anti-bias training. Body cameras will be required on all stops, and every arrest will be reviewed for racial disparities." David felt something release in his chest. Not just vindication, hope, real, systemic change. Frank finally brought down his gavel. "This court is adjourned." As people filed out, Bradley approached David, eyes red and swollen. "Mr. Thompson, I know sorry isn't enough, but I swear I'll spend my career making this right." David studied the young officer's face. "Then start by listening, really listening, to the people you're supposed to serve." Bradley nodded, understanding that his real education was just beginning. 3 months later, David Thompson stood in front of a crowded community center in South Providence. 50 aspiring law students, most of them black and brown, most from neighborhoods where expensive cars attracted police attention, listened to every word. "The day I was arrested changed everything for me," David said, his voice steady. "Not because it broke me, but because it reminded me why I became a lawyer in the first place." He told them the whole story: the traffic stop, the handcuffs, the 6 hours in a cell, and Judge Caprio's response that turned humiliation into justice. Some people asked why I didn't sue for millions, why I didn't demand Officer Bradley be fired, and honestly, I thought about it. I was angry enough. The young woman in the front row raised her hand. "So why didn't you?" David smiled. "Because I realized something. Destroying one rookie cop wouldn't change the system that created him, but educating him, making him understand, that could change hundreds of lives over his career." After the talk, David packed his briefcase and headed to his car, the same BMW that had caused so much trouble. He no longer felt anxious driving it. Judge Caprio's ruling had been covered by every news outlet in Rhode Island. The story had gone viral. Now, when officers saw him, they nodded respectfully. Things had changed. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Thompson, this is Officer Bradley. I know you're probably tired of hearing from me, but I wanted you to know something. I just stopped a traffic violation today. A kid in an old Honda with expired registration. Instead of towing his car, I helped him find resources to get it renewed. He reminded me of my younger brother. Thank you for teaching me to see people, not profiles." David read the message twice, then saved it. At the courthouse, he had a meeting with Judge Caprio about a new initiative, a civilian review board for all arrests involving racial disparities. Frank had asked David to chair it. Frank's chambers looked the same as always: organized chaos, law books everywhere, family photos on every surface. "David, come in." Frank stood and shook his hand warmly. "How was the talk at the community center?" "Powerful. Those kids needed to hear that justice is possible, that the system can work when good people demand it." Frank gestured to a chair. "You've become quite the advocate. The mayor called me yesterday. He wants to expand your review board citywide because of what happened to me. Because you turned trauma into change." Frank sat back. "You could have walked away, taken the settlement, never thought about it again. Instead, you're making sure the next David Thompson doesn't face what you faced." David looked at the older judge, this man who'd stood up for him when it mattered most. "You taught me that, Your Honor. When you handcuffed Bradley, you weren't punishing him. You were teaching him empathy. That's what real justice looks like." Frank nodded slowly. Justice without compassion is just revenge. But compassion without accountability is just empty words. We need both. They discussed the review board for another hour. New protocols, training requirements, consequences for violations. Real systemic change taking shape. As David left, he passed Officer Bradley in the hallway. The young officer wore his uniform with less arrogance now, more humility. "Mr. Thompson," Bradley said, "thank you for your patience with me. I know I don't deserve it." "You're earning it," David replied. "Keep earning it." Outside, the Providence sun felt warmer somehow. David drove home past the spot where he'd been pulled over. A black teenager rode by on a bike, music playing from a speaker. Carefree, safe. David hoped that Kid would never know the fear he'd felt that day, that Officer Bradley and others like him were learning a better way, that Judge Caprio's lesson was spreading, one officer, one stop, one moment of compassion at a time. If you were falsely arrested like David, would you choose revenge or reform? Comment below.